Because I have an unhealthy obsession with corsets, today we are turning these old pair of jeans into a corset top. I have pins. So here's the jeans that we're working with. I'm going to start by turning them inside out. The aim of the game here is to maximize the space that we have. I'm going to need 3 pattern pieces cut out. This is just me doing a bit of damage control. Granted, if you keep your sewing supplies as being decent members of your sewing community, you will not have this problem, but I clearly didn't store these properly. If you want to know where these patterns came from, I do have a separate tutorial on how to make a corset pattern from scratch, needing no measurements whatsoever, so make sure you check that out before you watch this if you don't have a corset pattern that you're working with. So now we have our pattern pieces, so we have 1, 2 and 3. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay these out on my fabric. I need 2 of each of these pieces. To make my life easier, what I'm going to do is cut it out on the leg. So as you can see, for this bottom leg, I'm just going to cut this out because it's obviously the pants have the front and the back. It's just going to cut out both of these pieces at the same time. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hold it down, grabbing my chalk, and I'm tracing around the pattern, and then I'm just going to cut inside of those lines. That's the easiest way for me to cut out patterns, just because it works better for me. That's piece number 1 cut out. Now we have 2 more pieces to cut out with this and this.
A few minutes later.
Now we have our pieces cut out, we're going to start laying them together or assembling it in the way that we're going to stitch it. When you start assembling the pieces, it will kind of make sense where it needs to go or where the pieces need to sit. But granted, if you want that additional step of making sure that it's easy to figure out where you're putting your pieces, then you can label them in that initial stage as well, just to make sure that you have all your pieces together and you know where you're putting them. Then I'm just grabbing my pins to join those pieces together, and then we can go ahead and stitch it on our sewing machine. If you are using denim, make sure you get yourself denim machine needles or jean machine needles, just because it makes it so much easier when sewing with this kind of heavy fabric. And I'm just going to stitch that on my sewing machine using a straight stitch. So now that we've stitched it and it's starting to come together, we're pushing that to the side for a minute, and we need to cut out our back panels. So for the back panels, what I'm going to do is cut out 4 inches by 8 inches, and I'm cutting out 2 of those pieces. So one's going to sit on one side and one's going to sit on the other side. So I'm just marking that out onto the leftover jeans or fabric that I have, and I'm going to cut that out as well. Here we have our back pieces, and then what I'm going to do is join it onto the front pattern. So one of the back pieces is going to sit on the end of one side, and the other back piece is going to sit on the other end of the other side. Granted, so I'm just putting it in place, and I'm going to pin it together, and I'm going to stitch along that line as well. Now that we've stitched that down, our front piece is coming together nicely, but we do need lining for this. So I've grabbed whatever extra fabric I have lying around the house. For me, that was some blue satin fabric, and I'm just going to place the corset top on top of that, and I'm tracing around that, granted with my chalk, and then I'm cutting that out. Granted, this method is not as neat as it could be. If you do want a really neat way of doing this, I would recommend going back through the steps of cutting out those corset pieces for the lining, stitching that together, and then attaching it onto the back of your current corset. But I thought I'd do it this way just to make my life a bit easier. Now we've cut up the lining, I'm putting it to one side and I'm grabbing the main corset. So now we have the front of the corset stitched together. I'm going to stitch down next to all of these stitches to make casing that we're going to use to add in the boning. So I'm just going to stitch down here and here and here and the rest of the lines, and we're going to use about 1/2 inch seam allowance if I can get away with that, or 1/3 of an inch. So we're going to be stitching that down basically, and then we're going to add the boning inside it. Now that we've done the top stitch, before we add the lining, we need to actually make the straps. So I'm grabbing whatever excess fabric I have left, which is actually not much, and I'm just going to stitch or find like the longest part that I can actually stitch down to make the straps. And I'm going to do that, and I'm making 4 straps total because I want 2 on each side. Now for the very painful process of turning them inside out. I'm ended up doing this off camera because when I try to do it on camera, it literally takes forever and I almost lose my mind every single time. So I'm just going to flip that and come back, and then we'll have our straps to attach. Then I'm just pinning my straps where I want them to go, and I'm going to grab my lining and put that on top and then pin those layers together. So I'm pinning the lining together as well as the straps as well, and then we're going to stitch along that top line. I feel like we're getting somewhere, guys. We're making progress. So as you can see, I have added attached the lining and also the straps. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert the boning, and the boning is going to go in these channels. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not putting it in here because this is the back panel and I don't need it for the back.
A few moments later.
So we have a hiccup, at least in my mind. So when I made this corset, I kind of had a feeling that if I add the strap, then it would sit too high with this kind of thing here. I've started taking it out for this side already because I just don't like how it looks. So I'm going to bring the strap down a bit more, which may mean I need to detach the lining, maybe cut out another piece so it fits better, and then re-amend it that way. So yeah, it's definitely slowed down my process of completing it. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and detach the lining and make the adjustment. So back to the drawing board, we are seam ripping that lining very carefully because we do not want to tear out our denim fabric and the straps as well. What I would say is the best way you can avoid having this problem is to make sure you use a corset pattern that you like and that suits you and that suits the design that you're going for, rather than freestyling it. But yeah, as you can see, I'm just seam ripping in a fast time, and then we're gonna start the process over again. So I folded the corset in half just so that it's symmetrical, and then I'm going to take my chalk and I'm just going to mark that I want it to be a straight kind of neckline instead of having that curve at the side or just above my bust. So I'm just going to mark a straight line there, and then I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to try it on just so you guys can see the vision. So this is what I really want it to look like, so straight neckline and then the straps. So this is what we're going to work with. So now I'm going to go back in and I'm folding it in half. I'm adding pins as well just to secure it in place, and I'm going to grab my excess, now very limited lining, and I'm going to trace that out and cut that out as well, and then we're going to attach that onto the corset. Also, I got these new fabric scissors and I love how easy they are to work with. So this is your commercial break reminder to get scissors or get sewing tools that actually work for you, because they make your sewing life so much easier. So boom, we're adding the lining and we're adding the straps as well, because where we want them to sit, and then I'm just going to stitch along the top again. And now what we're going to do before we stitch the bottom is we're going to have to figure out where we want the other side of the strap to go as well. So I'm just gauging where I want it to sit on me, and then I'm going to seam rip a little hole in my lining to insert the strap, and then I'm going to stitch that closed. Again, I'm going to do that for both sides, and then we can move on to closing the bottom. Now the top is starting to come together again, so what we're going to do is stitch the bottom. So I'm pinning along the bottom of my corset. As you can see, there seems to be a bit of boning sticking out, but I'm going to go in and trim those later. So I'm just clipping or pinning all along the bottom, and then I'm going to stitch that with a straight stitch all the way across. And then once I have stitched it, I'm going to go in with my fabric scissors and I'm trimming off the excess fabric just so that it's flat for when we turn it inside out. I'll admit it does look a bit pokey at the bottom at the minute, but that will be fixed once we iron it and try it on. Granted, I could have made that boning a tiny bit shorter, but all we need to do now is do the closures for the side, or rather the back. So I decided to go with denim loopholes for this. So again, I grabbed my fabric that I had left over and I made some straps that are about 1/2 inch wide and about 2 inches long, I believe. So I'm just going ahead and cutting those out. And then what I'm going to do before I go ahead and attach these is I'm going to press the back pieces that I have, or the back of the corset rather. So I'm folding it inside and pressing it just so that it's flat, and that is going to make it 10 times easier to add these belt loops on. Then what I need to do is figure out how to evenly space these belt loops, and to do that I placed one at the very top, one at the bottom, and then one in the middle, and then I placed 2 additional ones in between both of those. If you want to get techie, you can bring out your tape measure and measure like the total length of that back piece section, which should be about 7 inches if I remember correctly, and then you divide that by 5 since we're adding 5 belt loops, and then you'd know what points to add each belt loop at, or you can eyeball it. I think the main thing is try to make sure that you're spacing them out very evenly, because it's going to have a huge impact on the neatness of the neatness of the overall corset once you've completed it. Then my stitching down to secure those belt loops in place, I threaded my straps through, and this is what it came out looking like, guys. I love this. I ended up doing a little rose thingy, or tying the straps at the front to secure those in place, and then look at that little woven through strap at the back with a little bow. I'm absolutely in love. Let me know if you do like how this came out as well, and I'll see you in my next tutorial.